So this one's on reading strategies. Is there anything you want me to answer for you? Anything you're wondering about in terms of the topic today?
I know I struggle with when I read something I just don't understand the first time.
You don't understand the first time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to know? We can definitely hit on that.
And I know I have like quizzes on like chapters. I was trying to see like how would I study for that.
Okay. All right. All right, so we'll get started. The first thing you should know when you read is you always want to consider the purpose, right? So why is the professor want you to read a particular thing? Because there's a variety of insights and perspectives you can use when you read something. So for instance, if you were to read The Color Purple in a literature class, the literature professor might focus on like how it's written and the little letters and then how it contributes to kind of the enjoyment of the book, how the writer crafted it. You might read the same book in a sociology class that looks at kind of the patriarchal hierarchy and how it keeps women down, right? So purpose is big when you look at anything that you read, right? So if you look at the chart, there's three main reasons that a professor could assign a reading. The first thing is that you could read for information, you could read for understanding, or you could read for entertainment, all right? Usually in an academic setting, you're not going to read so much for entertainment. You're going to read more for the other two. And depending upon whether you're reading to gather information or for more understanding, it might shift your focus a bit, all right? So when you read for information, the goal is to add facts to existing knowledge. So you're just gathering things you don't yet know, all right? In understanding, you know all the facts, you're just looking at it from a different perspective. So it's to look at information kind of in a new way. So when you read for understanding, your focus is more on insights. When you read for information, you're gathering facts, things like quotes, things like statistics, things you just don't know that you're kind of gathering in your knowledge base. So when you read for information, the central question is, what does it say? And when you read for understanding, it's more like, what does it mean, right? So the first thing is like, why are you reading it? What does the professor want you to get out of it? So the first thing you should always consider when you read something is the purpose of it. Like what is the author's purpose to write this? And what is the professor hoping that you get out of it? Right? Questions, concerns at this point? All right, if things come up, let me know. In terms of helping with understanding and helping with reading comprehension, so you had said that, your teacher gives quizzes on the readings and like how do you focus on that? So the first thing is don't use highlighters, right? When you read something, how do you approach it?
Usually I'll read it the first time, and the second time I'll look for like either like some statistics or something that's like in italics. I know that's important.
Okay, so you read it twice.
Right.
Okay, then how do you see that helps you?
It kind of helps me because the classes talk about psychology, so like I know I'm gonna get quiz on like important dates in psychology or like the famous psychologists, so I try to look for those.
Okay, so when you read it the first time, it's more to get the lay of the land,
Right.
and when you read it the second time, it's more to kind of to target your studying to what the teacher's looking for.
Yeah.
That's excellent. You always if you can read something more than once, that's a good thing, right? Because like you said, you usually got to get the lay of the land. You got to know what's coming at you, and then when you read it again, it's like watching a movie again. You catch things you didn't the first time, right? So the reading is no different. So if you could read it more than once, the better off you are, all right? Most people in a college setting tend to read with a highlighter in mind. You don't want to use a lot of highlighters. Well, you've all been down to the bookstore where we purchase a book and it looks like somebody colored in the book. It looks like a coloring book, right? You need sunglasses to look at the pages, right? That's a very passive way to study and to read something. It's always better to annotate more than highlight. Do you agree with me or disagree with me?
I agree.
Why do you suppose that is?
I know in high school we were taught to annotate, and just highlighting, you're not really retaining anything.
Yeah, you're not bringing anything to the table, right? You're not really thinking through the material, right? You're just kind of coloring it in and moving on, right? But if you annotate or ask a question in the material or connect it to something you're taking time to kind of think through it and write about it, and it's connecting it to things you already know and things that are important to you, which enhances your comprehension and understanding. Mm-hmm. Read it twice. We already went through that. That's a good thing to do. You want to know the jargon, right? What do you think I mean here? What does jargon mean?
I I think it refers to like like difficult word. I would say like a word that you don't know.
Often they're words that people outside the field wouldn't know, right? They're specialized words, right? Words within the field, right? So, like, I'm an academic advisor. I read, advising research. One of the key terms in my field is this thing called intrusive advising. Like, what does that mean, right? Anthropology has a lot of terminology that someone outside of it wouldn't necessarily know, right? So knowing the specialized words within the field, right? Where could you go to get that information?
Usually, I would use a dictionary.
Okay, a dictionary is a great resource, right? Anything else?
No. Sometimes I use the Google search engine.
Okay. All right. Another good resource would be like the class discussions or like the class PowerPoints. This is why it's good to go to class. But yeah, you want to get to know what the specialized words within the field or the jargon, right? You want to know the key debates within the particular discipline, right? So you took in a psychology class right now, you said, right? So one of the key debates within that discipline is like nature versus nurture, right? Do you hear about that debate?
Yeah.
What do you know what that means?
We talked about it, we haven't like really gone over it yet.
Okay. Yeah, so it's more like how much of your behavior is genetics, right? That's nature, right? Things that you're just kind of born with, and how much of your behavior is nurture or the social environment in which you grow up in, right? So the more experience, the more background information you can bring to a text, the more you're going to get out of it, right? So a good key question to ask yourself not only is what is its purpose, right? But what do I already know about the subject matter? Right? Because if you can connect what you already know to the things that you're reading, you're going to get more out of it. It's going to make more sense to you, right? And just annotating, writing notes, writing questions in the margin is going to help flush that out and make a bit more sense to you, right? So again, don't use highlighters. Read twice. Know the jargon. Know the key debates within the discipline. Now we're going to move from not so much general stuff as in actual reading strategies, right? So one is SQ3R. Have you ever heard about that? No. Okay, so this is an acronym. It's pretty popular. If you take like SD, Student Development 101, or now they're calling it College and Career Success 101, they're going to go over this with you. The first thing is the S stands for survey, right? How do you survey a reading?
I'm not sure.
Okay, what does it mean to survey something?
Well, I know to survey something is to get to see what people think about a certain topic.
Okay, and how does the person go about doing that?
Usually, sometimes they either hand out paper or if it's online, they ask like simple questions, either like true or false or a number scale.
Okay, and how many people are they looking to capture when they do that?
I know it's like a group of people.
It's a group of, yeah, it's broad, right? So survey is taking kind of a broad assessment, a broad lay of the land, right, to see the information that's out there, right? So how would you do that when it comes to a textbook?
I would say like I was doing it before, trying to see like the important, trying to see the important details.
Yeah, see kind of what's important, right? So you're gonna, you mentioned the italics words a little while back, right? So I'm making note of the italics words, I'm making note of the bold words, reading this chapter summary at the end of at the back, right? Getting to know like the title, the subheadings. If you can read with the questions, making note of the questions in the back, that's good, right? We'll get into why that is in a minute. But just kind of getting a lay of the land, like we're kind of seeing what's coming at you. Right? Because we had already said that we read twice, right? Once to get the lay of the land and once to kind of see things that you missed the first time, right? For the details the teacher's looking for, right? One way you can cut back on that is you could survey. You could skim it, right? Sometimes people refer to this as skimming the chapter and then going back and reading it with more detail, right? What do you think the Q means?
I would say question.
Yeah, exactly, yep. So you always want to read with questions in mind, right? Which is why I said it's a good idea to make note of the questions in the back of the chapter, right? Because the people who wrote that book wrote those questions, and so those are the people who wrote that book think that those are the questions that the reader should answer by the time they get to the end of that chapter, all right? So if you can get to the end of that chapter and you don't know an answer to a question that's listed there, what does that tell you?
You have to reread.
Yeah. What do you think the first R means?
Read?
Yeah. So you did your little survey, right? You got the lay of the land, you know what's coming at you, you know what to expect. You got questions in mind, now you just got to read it, right? So you go through, you read it. What does the next R mean?
I would say reread it, or I'm not sure.
All right, well, I'll put it down here. So this is reread,
Okay.
right? Or review. Because again, you always kind of want to keep it fresh, right? So that's this R. What do you think this step is?
I'm thinking of relate, or I'm not sure.
You're close. Yeah, it's recite, right? What do you think that means?
Try to repeat the information,
Okay, repeat it how?
like in a way that you remember it. I know some people write it down.
Yeah, so repeat it in a way that you remember it, right? Or in your own words,
Yeah.
right? Because we've all kind of read something and, you know, the reader can spit it back the way the author wrote it, but they have no idea what it means, right? That doesn't help you out if you can just kind of regurgitate it, but you don't understand it, right? So recite it in your own words is a good way to kind of check in with yourself again to make sure you fully understand what you're reading. Right? So this works really well for textbooks that are really like laid out and really methodical in how they're kind of laid out. You survey them, you ask yourself the questions of the material, you read with the questions in mind, it helps guide the reading. You state it back in your own words to test your understanding of it, and then you always want to reread or review just to kind of keep it fresh for yourself. Right? Would you be willing to try this?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, this might help you kind of study for those tests that you had mentioned, and to kind of, it's just constantly checking in with yourself to make sure you understand it, right? You're checking in with yourself because of the questions, and you're checking in with yourself because of the reciting or the stating back in your own words. So that's one that works really well with textbooks. So now I have a variety of different kind of handouts here because we read all kinds of different things, right? So you might read a literature class, and you might have, your approach might be a bit different for work of literature versus a textbook. You might read academic journal articles, and that's kind of a different approach. You might read kind of just kind of monographs or just kind of general things for a class, and there might be a different approach you could use, or you might read poetry, which takes different skills. Which ones do you think would be best helpful to you today? Are you taking like a lit where you need more poetry and novels, or are you taking more like read anything? It's what's the significance of this, right? The next one that you want to look for when you read a work of literature is what I call words to the wiser, which is when an older character shares some kind of insight with a younger character, right? When someone with more information imparts that wisdom onto someone who didn't have it before, right? Why is that something to make note of?
I would say because we might think about how this reflects on the growth of the character.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, do you see a common thread with all of these?
Yeah.
What is that common thread you're seeing?
I'm saying like it's making us, the reader, think about why the author is making these choices.
Yeah, that's true, right? And something else that you see in there?
I would say that's it. Nothing else comes to mind.
Well, all of these kind of carry the common theme of character development, right? When the character is growing and changing, that's something to mark the book about, right? Something else is tough questions, right? So that's when the character asks himself a tough or difficult question, right? Why is that something to stop and take a close look at?
This helps us as the reader to think about the question they ask the character.
Yeah, right, because we talked about questions earlier, right? Questions are the Velcro to our brains, right? So it kind of helps something stand out, and we kind of hunt for answers, and things make better sense, right? And if tough questions are something that we can kind of look beyond the book for, and kind of look at like, how does this question, how does kind of what's being discussed here connect to the world out there, right? Which is always good in literature, right? Because when you write a work in a in a literature class, when you write your essays, it's not so much about the characters in the book as it is kind of using these books as lenses to see larger societal things. So when the character asks himself a tough question about what's going on around him, we can apply that same question to society and take a closer look at it. Right? And these are the types of things we want to look at as we move from reading into writing papers. Right? Any questions?
No.
All right. And the last one I got for literature is again and again. Right? What do you think I mean by that?
Probably like, I know in some books I read, there's details that keep coming over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's making the reader, like, I'm trying to make the reader realize that detail that keeps popping up over and over again is very important.
Yeah, there's some significance, right? Because as we've been talking about, right, writing is all about choices, right? There's a million different things that a writer could talk about on a page, right? So again, if he's bringing something to the forefront again and again and again, we should be questioning, like, what is the significance of that, right? So if you're reading a work of literature and this coffee pot that this character has on the stove is something that comes up every time that character is mentioned, right? Then we got to ask ourselves, why is the author choosing to bring this up? Like, what does this mean? Like, what kind of symbol might this be, right? Any questions on works of literature?
No.
Okay, so again, the things to keep in mind are contrasted contradictions, aha moments, memory flashbacks, words of the wiser, tough questions, and again and again. All right, and again, they focus on really character development. As the character grows and changes, we want to make note of that as we read. All right, is there something else that I can, like one of the other strategies you want to go take a closer look at today?
Oh, no, thank you.
Is that just the literature?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Any questions that you have at this point, or things that came up for you?
No, this was really helpful.
Good. All right. So the folks that are watching online, if you need more of these, let me know, and we can go over some together in my office. All right.